3 years ago, when we started out in this journey of trying to understand what's going on, why do we have such a broken private equity funding system for life science, and we discovered that really there's a valley of death. And the valley of death, if you ask any entrepreneur, they'll know exactly what you're talking about because they've had to go through it. Typically it's years 0 to 3 because the venture capitalists figured out that there's no return on the 0 to 3, so why would they invest? And we think that philanthropic capital is the solution. And you know, most family offices typically are like ours. They have the for-profit arm and they have the not-for-profit arm. And I think there's some really cool things that are happening, and maybe we can even get Sue a little bit further on to make a few comments about that, because she's been heavily involved in that. So I want to just hope that you get a chance to meet the people at your table, and what we'll do is we'll come back in about 20 minutes, but you know, get to know each other. And I'd like to introduce my colleagues. So we've got Maria there, we've got Grace there, and David's over there, and Carter's there. So I hope that you get a chance to meet some of our team here. And what we would really like to do is, you know, I'd like to get very rapidly, when we start again in about 20 minutes, you know, what is the most burning issue that you discussed at your table? I'd just like to get a little bit of a sense of, you know, kind of what's going on, so that we can kind of bring that together. This has really been a great gathering point, and I just thank, I think Dennis has already left, but Dennis was here, and it's been a great partnership with Life Science Nation, and a great opportunity to really expand this effort. The Life Science Nation has really tried to focus on the early stage, and one of the things that we've done is we've actually gotten them even further into the early stage. If you ask on the for-profit side when venture capitalists get involved, they'll typically say, or if you ask them, do they do early stage, they'll all say yes. And you ask them what year they get involved, it's typically year 3, because they realize that from 0 to 3, that's a one-time return. Why would you invest in that time frame? And so it's really been good. We had an excellent panel, and I'm going to ask in a few minutes you know, some of the panelists to speak on that. We also have, I'd like to make sure that we cover, we have a whole program of women in healthcare, and I'm finding out that all the numbers I had were wrong, and we have Maria with the right numbers, but you know, that's just the way it is. But I'd like to kind of look at, you know, we're at the beginning of the year, so I'd like to just make a few comments on kind of where we are, what we're doing. We've been able to, in 2018, we did kind of a feasibility study. We asked the question, do you think family offices would really like to get together? Much like the angel groups were formed. I met Hans Severins and knew him in San Francisco, and in 1982 he said, I'm going to form the Band of Angels down in Palo Alto, and we all said good luck. Well, although he died in 2004 and didn't see the real fruition of it, there are now 13,000 angels in 260 groups, and I'm just blown away.
Band of Angels is fully alive.
All right, fully alive. And we have a couple of angels from the Band of Angels, and you know, it's just really amazing how it's come together. And so we asked the question, well, can we bring the family office together? Because no one in the family office world that there are some service organizations that kind of support it, but they're always talking about wealth transfer, and you know, they're really not focusing on anything like healthcare. And yet, if you really look at it in terms of healthcare, almost every family has someone with a chronic disease somewhere, and you know, they're in it. You're just in it by default, if nothing else. And you know, it was very interesting when we did the Singapore gathering. We had a friend of mine is a professor there, Annie Coe, and she brought together for lunch her students that have now graduated. She goes on the board of a number of the family offices there and some of their companies. But she brought the kids together. And, what are you interested in, kids? And these actually are the crazy rich Asians. They're 5th and 6th generation Singaporeans. And the interesting thing was that the first 2 things I asked them, name 3 things you're interested in. First 2 are sort of millennial type of things, water and sanitation. It applies not to Singapore, but to Malaysia, Indonesia, and India. Okay, I get that. Third one was Alzheimer's. They know they're going to have to deal with Alzheimer's with some of their even parents and the elders in their family. They know nothing about it, and they certainly don't want any part of it. And so I think we've got a kind of a basis for a discussion, and that's kind of some of the things that we found out during last year is that I started talking about this. I was saying that, let's see a show of hands. How many people know that 1/3 to 1/2 of Alzheimer's, according to research, is preventable? Would you raise your hand? Okay, here we are. A lot of people just don't know this. And we actually have a global webinar yesterday, and you can go to globalbetterhealth.com and you can get the replay of it. But we had the world leaders on it. Ken Cooper is my doctor. He's been my doctor for 22 years. How many people know Ken Cooper, the name? All right, see, they don't know, people know. He invented the word aerobics. Have you heard the word aerobics? Yeah, a few more hands go up. Not all. A few more hands go up. But he invented 51 years ago, and he is an amazing guy. And he sits down. They have 14 doctors on staff. They've seen 20,000 people over the last 20 years, and our health care cost today of that group is 40% less. I talk to governments, I talk to insurers, and they have to listen to me because their healthcare costs are exploding, and everyone's figuring out whether it's Obamacare, Trump care, I don't care what kind of care, that's not going to work. It's because it's basically going to be price controls. What works is prevention, and it's the future of medicine. And we have to start addressing that in very significant ways. And I'm just about to go off to Asia and the Middle East, Australia and New Zealand. And I'm talking to governments about this. And they listen. And not all of them listen, but there are a number of them that really, I was just talking to the Chief Strategy Officer was sitting next to me from Blue Cross Blue Shield, Arizona. Really lovely gal. You may know Beth, but she's a very accomplished person. But when I talk about how can we put together a program to reduce healthcare costs, she kind of looks at me but the other thing is there's a hook. I'm talking about lowering healthcare costs, and I can document it. And she has to listen to me, even though she might be skeptical, because if I'm right, and she misses out, she looks bad. So she's got, and I think there's some real good opportunities here to work with people. It's really the future of medicine. I just was over at J.P. Morgan. They have 9,000 people that come, so it's a preposterously big program. But I won't name names, but you can probably figure it out. There's some people that are stuck in the 20th century that just haven't entered the 21st century, and they're talking about all the great drugs, and how their growth, their trajectory of growth of drugs is, and that this is going to be all this cash flow, and they're going to do buybacks, and they're going to increase their dividends and all that. Guys, this is the 21st century. What we need to talk about, and they had a group from Australia that I thought was very interesting. They have values-based reimbursement already there. And unless you're talking about, I think that's an opportunity for the drug companies to work with some of the people like that we're working with, and all in the prevention side, because what we should be interested in is not disease. We should be interested in health. Come on, guys, what's going on here? And that's not what they're talking about. And this has got to change, and it's got to change. The numbers are so outrageous. Let me just walk you through some of the Alzheimer's numbers. Worldwide, it's 50 million people that have Alzheimer's, and this is according to the Alzheimer's Disease International, which co-hosted this webinar with us. And it's available if you just go on our website, globalbetterhealth.com or .org. You'll see it and you can listen to it. It's a little bit under an hour, 58 minutes, but it is under an hour. You know, it's amazing. So we're going to go from 50 million to 152 million by the year 2050. We're spending $1 trillion now on it worldwide. What are we going to be spending in 2050 when you adjust it for inflation? I mean, we're going to be spending huge numbers. We got to get this thing under control. And there was, I just saw a thing in the Wall Street Journal how, you know, cancer, they've gotten a little bit from diagnostics and, you know, and all, but prevention is the way. It's the low-hanging fruit. And one of the things that we emphasize several things in the webinar. I use the word epidemic 3 times. We're facing an epidemic. What, guys, do you not understand about an epidemic? But there are a lot of people that just don't understand we're facing. And it's a self-inflicted epidemic. As I started to study this, you know, the 5 chronic diseases, and we're doing broadcasts on it. We're the only group that I know that are doing broadcasts on it. The broadcasts are up on our website. Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. They're all self-inflicted. Why? Because of our lousy eating habits. I try to have good food here, so it's a little bit healthier for you. We really have really amazing stuff that's you know, going on. But it's bad eating habits. It's lack of exercise. And then there's stuff that you wouldn't even necessarily think about. And I had a little fun with my doctor, Ken Cooper, because I read this research that came out of Randy Bateman, is a guy I know at the Washington University, and they came out with some studies in July about sleep. And, you know, as you get older, hey, you know, your melatonin level goes down, you don't sleep. Well, I'm taking melatonin supplements, but, you know, I was getting up in the middle of the night, and I was working and all that. What a dumb idea that is. I had no idea that they've now done the research that shows that you need 7 hours of uninterrupted sleep in deep sleep so your amyloid plaque can clear. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, guess what? Your amyloid plaque is not clearing, so you're accumulating amyloid plaque, and that leads to Alzheimer's. Well, you know, and the funny thing was that I corresponded with Ken Cooper, and you know, I said, well, can I take something else because the melatonin isn't quite getting me where I need to go, and he made some recommendations. Then I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he said, wow, I just read this really cool article about, you know, sleeping through the night and all the research that was done. That was stuff I read 4 months ago. And he's, you know, things are happening. And we've now, there are protocols. And in the protocols, just even if we just follow the protocols from the Cooper Clinic, he sits down and his other doctors sit down people. And when you get 40, here are the 8 things that you have to do. And they've got serum levels, the blood levels of vitamin D, vitamin B12, and the omega-3 that you have to have. You've got certain blood level pressures and all that. And there's actually a rating system. One of our scientific advisors is Mia Kiva-Pelto. She's the researcher that did what was in Finland. It was called the Finger Study, and it started to document that it's a multi-dimensional approach to the reduction of Alzheimer's. And she now works with 15 countries. There's going to be a report coming out that she's worked on with the World Health Organization. It's going to come out in the first half. That's what we're saying more officially, but informally it's probably the first quarter on Alzheimer's risk reduction. And so I think we're at a very much of an inflection point where we're about to see things really change rather dramatically here. You know, we've got to bring people together on this thing. We've got to talk about it. And what I'm hoping is that with the family offices that we brought together last year, yeah, is it feasible to bring family offices together? Do they want to meet each other? The answer is yes. And what we're doing this year in 2019 is we're working on awareness. You know, you're not going to make investment until you're aware of what the problem is, and you kind of figure out where in the process you want to play. And there's some really cool stuff going on in Alzheimer's, particularly in the diagnostic space. We're going to have some blood markers, AP42, and there was a guy that I was talking to earlier today that has some other markers, the blood markers that could be interesting, but there's also motion, where you can actually track people, you build a baseline of their motion and see if their motion changes. You can also do speech. When Nancy Reagan announced in 1994 that her husband Ronald had Alzheimer's, they went back and looked at his first term and second term and his speech patterns, and they did change. And there's, you know, almost daily there are things that are popping up. We're going to start solving at least the diagnostic thing. And if we catch this thing earlier, and if we can get people on the prevention route, I think it's going to be good. And we also think, and Mia Kiva Belto and I are working on this idea that if we can get catch this thing earlier, that maybe some of the drugs that are already out there that didn't work, too little, too late, might work earlier. When we can catch it. The problem is there's nothing reliable, there's nothing low cost. The only thing that they have out there is PET scans, $3,000 typically, and it's for the very late stage. I mean, we've got to get earlier in the system. And so that's one of the efforts that we're looking at. And so just in this term of a family office, what we're doing is that we're doing broadcasts, and no one else is doing it that we know of. And we have governments that want to co-brand with our broadcast around the world. And so we're going to be, on the trip I'm doing with Asia, the Middle East, Australia, and New Zealand, I'm going to be talking to governments about potentially co-branding with us, because this is a problem that has to be solved. And you know, part of the problem is actually the food. There's not a lot of consensus on it, but you know, I was watching the news on Saturday night, and they had U.S. News and World Report reviewed 41 different diets, and they came up with a top 5. And their comment was, here are different diets, and they were talking a little bit about the diets, and they kind of, it was a throwaway line, oh yeah, if you eat the right diets, you can perhaps reduce cancer. Yes, you can! We have an epidemic, guys! They lost the news tag was all wrong. No, we have to get this thing right. I think that the people that are going to get this thing right are the governments. They're going to have to, and we're going to go to the people first. But the people that will be the change agents are going to be the governments, and we know how to work with some of that. And the family offices taking the lead and saying, we have to get the word out, and we have to start taking action, and we have to do some prevention. And we're working on some really cool things that I think we'll be announcing in late 2019 on that. But I think it's really important. And, you know, kind of reflecting on it, I was looking at some statistics from Pew Research. In the election here in the U.S., 75% were going to the polls on health care. 75% of Americans were going on the economy. Well, guess what? If we don't get health care costs under control, we crash both health care and we crash the economy. Can we think about this a little bit better? Can we do something better than this? Because this doesn't work. And so we've got a lot of things to do. Maybe I'd like to open up for some questions, and I want Maria then to at least address some healthcare stuff. But do you have any questions on anything that I said? Maria, could you come up and tell us what you're doing with women in healthcare?
Stetson family women, so it's Grace from Australia, our colleague, and then Caroline Stetson. Unfortunately, she couldn't come here tonight, and me, so the three of us focusing on women in healthcare, and then Chuck asked, especially what can be done. First focus is on women in family offices, what can be done to increase number of women as investors. And the second focus area is how to increase, support women as more entrepreneurs in life science area. So those two focus areas are. And then some numbers that you talked about a little while ago. So Mass Bio did the study about women entering life science. So at the entry level it's like 50-50 women and men. But when it gets a little higher, then it's 20% of women are in leadership role, and 10% are at board level, and only 7% of biotech CEOs are women. So there's a lot of things to improve, and actually, so many women entrepreneurs, so working together, maybe you guys there, how to increase, what to do, how to do that. And traditional VC is only 5% are women. And family offices, it's 9% are women CEOs in family offices. And investment offices only 8%. And angels are 25%. So there's a challenge, how to increase that number. And impact investment is really important, so we are looking for that. And in April, we are going to have a program. So these are going to be the two topics. We're having panels and getting these experts to talk how to do that, how to do it. And it's not only for women, we invite men. So it's everybody's interest. So, and if you have any ideas, comments, topics, please let me know. But it's for everybody. Thank you.
I'd like to just do very briefly, I didn't set this up, but Joan, can you come up and tell us a little bit about what's going on with the early stage? We had a panel that I think was pretty interesting. Can you tell us about what the panel did and what your thoughts are, early stage stuff?
Thank you, Chuck, and ladies and gentlemen, Timmy, thank our host for his hospitality. Chance to meet you. My name is Joan Kerber-Walker. I have the honor of working with Chuck as a member of the Board of Trustees for the Healthcare Impact Foundation, where we have a group of leaders from around the United States and now around the world who are working together to solve the issue of early stage investment. Now, you heard Chuck talk a little bit about the issue, the crisis. What we don't think about is the continuum of issues that we're facing in our generation. So in the United States, we've now surpassed 18% of GDP is spent on healthcare. That's not sustainable, and what's more challenging is that as my generation, and I am a baby boomer, okay, as we reach our peak spending years, not just in this country but around the world, we will cripple the economies. So as we work together, and I spend a lot of time in Washington and I spend a lot of time at the State House, and my best times with the innovators and with the clinicians and the patients, what we're finding is that we can't cost cut our way out of this problem. We don't want to change the way we value life. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be the generation where there's not enough to go around to solve the problem. So we have to innovate out of this challenge. Prevention is a big part of it. Eating right, sleeping right, taking the right medicines when they're prescribed for you, all have a huge impact on it. But when we look at diseases like cancer, yes, we can prevent a lot of it. But there are genetic factors that will cause it. And if we don't figure out how to treat that, we are looking at a giant challenge. In the case of cancer alone, and you can double check my numbers, Carolyn, because I didn't write them down, so I'm going from memory. But if we can reduce total cancer deaths around the world by 10%, then we can save $1.1 trillion annually. That's $1.1 trillion in healthcare costs that we can use for some of those things that we haven't found solutions yet. Hey, Brian.
All right.
So as we start looking at this, we also have to remember that as philanthropists, as investors, we all want sure things. But those innovations, those breakthroughs that we're looking for right now could be behind that window over there, or in a lab at the university behind me. And so we have to figure out how we go back into that risk pool to start bringing up investments in these young companies so that we can de-risk them to the point where investors feel safe investing in them. And so kudos to Chuck, who has worked in building solutions to not just promote health, but also create and foster the innovation when we need it. So in Arizona, we are kind of the petri dish for developing new sources of capital. And we've worked with the Stetson family office, thank you again, Chuck, and the Healthcare Impact Foundation. So the pilot for creating a new endowment-based mechanism for funding early stage innovation is being piloted in Arizona right now. And thanks to Chuck and the Stetson family office, we were able to work as the Healthcare Foundation overall and with AZHCIF, which is our little piece of it. And the IRS has given permission for us to invest the 5% proceeds from the endowment every year into these early stage companies for de-risking, instead of just giving it away. And then as they pay off, the endowment gets bigger and we can do more. Now that's great, and Chuck has been wonderful, but in Arizona we needed a little more help to get this job done, because I have a big nut to crack. We're trying to raise $200 million for the endowment and $50 million for what my team calls walking around money. Philanthropists call it direct investment. But what we are looking at is how do we get this job done. So I can't always ask Chuck to help bail me out when I need something. So we went to the U.S. Department of Commerce, and we explained what we were trying to do. And in December, we were notified by the U.S. Department of Commerce that the EDA is providing us with $300,000 in startup resources so that we can go and get this job done. And then once we prove the concept in Arizona, then we can go to Los Angeles, and we can go to North Carolina, and we can go to all different places around the U.S. and, by the way, around the world, and replicate this problem so that we can start moving those innovations forward faster. Now, my family is, actually my family's been in biotech probably longer than anybody else in the room, because my granddad was a 6th generation brewmaster. And then my daddy worked at General Motors and in the car business for 40 years, so cars are kind of fun too. So anybody who wants to come out to Arizona and see some of the amazing things that are going on there, and how an ecosystem is coming together to solve these problems. And I'm so grateful that I got to spend time today with my fellow panelists. I know Nicole is still here, and we were able to talk about how can we collaborate not just by state, but by region and by country to get this job done. But it starts with all of us, because you know what? If we keep sitting back and assuming that somebody else is going to do it, then it's not going to get done. And I remember when my hair wasn't gray and I wore probably a lot smaller size than I wear today. And I was running around here in the Silicon Valley back when we were building an industry based on real silicon in the Silicon Valley. That's actually where we started. And at that time we were looking at how do we do this? How do we get it together? We got everybody together to solve the problem. So as you run around the streets of San Francisco and you're looking for the next big thing, I encourage you to reach out to somebody on Chuck's team or talk to me or somebody else. Figure out how you can be involved in this, because this is the beginning of a movement, and it is a movement that is solving a problem that is not my problem or his problem or her problem. It's all of our problems, and we need to figure it out. So Chuck, thank you for sharing the platform. For all of our innovators, thank you for what you do, because you are the ones that are going to solve this problem. Innovators, raise your hand. I know I see Kent Dix back there. He's going to figure out how to take care of me when I'm old. He can't keep track of me now, but he'll get there by the time I'm homebound. So please, please figure out how you can get involved. Build the solution. Talk to people like Brian Smith, who's doing innovative things at Red Crow. Talk to Jerry, who's trying to help us put our talent mix together. Talk to the innovators. Talk to the investors. And talk to Chuck, because, well, you all know that if you want to make money, you got to talk to Chuck, right? Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Chuck.
Great.